Support for this show, Politics Done Right, comes from politicsdoneright.com, publishers of How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It, As I See It, Class Warfare, The Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors, and other books written by Egberto, Willies. Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right. Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. Growing up as the youngest of three sisters in Colón, Panama, Stacy Allen Barrow learned the importance of using her voice early. She is a graduate of Howard University School of Law and served in various legal roles, including her current position as a felony associate judge in Harris County. She has handled numerous high-profile cases and maintained a reputation of fairness. She is dedicated to community service, particular in supporting at-risk youth. Welcome to Politics Done Right, Judge Stacy Allen Barrow. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, and it's such an honor to be with you, a fellow Panamanian, and we have so much in common already, and you're doing a really amazing job of trying to empower people with information so they can make their own choice and let their voices be heard at the polls and overall within our political atmosphere. So thank you for having me.
Well, another judge that I met, actually, she's a good friend. She told me that there was this judge that she thought was Panamanian. And I think she knew you were Panamanian. She said, thought was Panamanian. And she said, you've got to talk to her. And I'm like, a Panamanian judge? And I thought, it's going to be from La Ciudad, La Capital. I thought it was going to be from the capital city or whatever. And then she said, when I read all your stuff, it's like, she's from Colón, Panama. That's where I'm from,
Yes, Colones.
Somos colonenses, but, It's great. You don't know, first of all, how honored I am and proud I am of having a fellow colonense from Panama that is a judge here in a criminal judge here in Harris County. It is, I'm beaming with pride that one of our own is in the legal system. And I really wanted to talk to you about not all of our Panamanianness, but I wanted to talk about some serious issues that are occurring here in Texas and beyond. But before we go any further, you are, in fact, I think your term is up and you are running again for the position?
Well, so 2.5 years ago, February 2022, I was appointed along with two others to serve as a felony associate judge in Harris County Criminal Courts. We were brought on as an effort to lower the backlog of cases that we heard about that really started with Harvey and were only made worse by our collective quarantine experience because of COVID-19. So you can imagine if the courts are closed, we're not trying cases. And so the numbers were looming. And so Commissioner's Court funded these positions. I applied, I interviewed, and a super majority of the current elected judges voted me in to this position. As an associate judge, I do pretty much everything that a current sitting judge does. I make the tough bond and bail hearing decisions. I handle motions to adjudicate guilt and motions to revoke probation. I had one, in fact, today that I took care of. Handle motions to suppress. I also handle a lot of post-conviction writs, which is when someone is appealing their case after being convicted, and it's really their last bite of the apple. And I've handled well over 50 of those matters that have gone before the Court of Criminal Appeals. In each case, they have agreed with my findings, and I've had the blessing of even granting people relief, meaning that these people get a new trial because they didn't get a fair trial the first time. And so my powers are vast. I pick a lot of juries. I presided of well over 1,500 different felony cases so far as an associate judge. And so there are some differences, but for the most part, the powers that I have are the same as an elected judge. And now, having that experience over the last 2.5 years, I'm bringing that experience to this current race for the 487th Criminal District Court here in Harris County, which is a new court, along with two others that will be on the ballot that was created in the last legislative session.
Did they create that because they had a shortage of judges pretty much? So they needed to enhance the amount of criminal judges they had in Harris County?
Yes. So the new bench was created in order to continue as an effort to help with the backlog of cases, because based on the data, because of the size of our county and the massive amount of growth we've had in recent years, we just don't have the judicial infrastructure to keep up. And so this is one of those efforts to help with the backlog of cases. The work I do now is precisely why I was appointed 2.5 years ago. And now the new court is in line with that effort as well.
Now so you're running now in the 487th, which is a new court that was created. Tell us a little bit about, is this a statewide job, a countywide job? Exactly what jurisdictions do you have?
Yeah, so the jurisdiction includes any felony matter that could come before the court that's charged within Harris County. So the way that judges get their cases, especially in criminal courts, but all throughout the different jurisdictions, it's a randomized system. So as a case comes in, the case is given out to the different courts. We have 26 courts now. And so in criminal courts and the felony courts. And so it's divvied up between those courts. So that's how I would receive cases. So any felony matter that is charged within Harris County could potentially come before my court. And for your audience, and I'm certainly not saying that they don't know this, but I think it's helpful that a felony is essentially anything that is punishable by up to from a year up to the death penalty. So the most serious of offenses.
Now, and these don't they also have a limit or a starting limit in the amount of money that was, if it's theft or whether it's over $200 or something like that? That's usually a felony versus a misdemeanor, or
in terms of what is the question?
Like let's say I committed a robbery or something like that. Is there a cutoff between when it's a felony and when it's a misdemeanor?
Yes. So the offenses, as I mentioned, are felony cases. So the way that you know you're a felony court is that the jurisdiction is the punishment range is for anything punishable by 1 year and all the way through the death penalty. So the most serious of offenses. Anything else in terms of county time, you're looking at anything that's up to 1 year in county jail. We're looking at prison time for the most part when you're coming up to felony court.
Now, and given that what you're dealing with are criminal issues, I think I've said this for a long time. I think the way one was reared, one's social experiences, one personal experiences should matter in these cases. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what gives you the ability to empathize with, from the richest person that come into your court to, let's say, the poorest person that come into your court?
Well, I like to say that, I'm not a politician. I'm a public servant at heart. And ultimately, I'm running for this bench because as a public servant, I am bringing a community-centered mindset to the justice system. And that is something that I have cultivated my entire life. If my mom was on the Zoom, she'll let you know when I was a little girl growing up in Panama, that my favorite phrase at the age of 3 was, yo tengo no me tengo derecho de hablar, right? Mm-hmm. Like, don't tell me to be quiet. I have a right to speak, because I was the youngest of 3 and I was constantly trying to raise my voice. And so I've always had a sense of knowing that my voice mattered and that there was something powerful about the way that I was able to communicate with people. And so that's something that I cultivated throughout my education and time at Howard University. And when I came back to practice law, I've been licensed for over 13 years. I continue to cultivate that. And I'm someone who is community-centered and deeply committed and connected to community. For 8 years, in recent years, I volunteered as a youth minister at my church, no pay, because I wanted to invest back in a community that I felt invested so much in me. And I felt that at a minimum, what I could help create was a safe space for young people to just be and figure things out. because so often when I was a criminal defense attorney and going to court, I was representing very young people who find themselves trapped in the system. And I understood that for the grace of God, there go I, and I had young people who themselves were finding themselves teetering within the worlds of criminality and sometimes getting in trouble. And there was this window we could kind of try to pull them in. And I bring that to the bench because when I see someone in court, I don't see them as a mere cause number. They're just not another data point for me. They're a human being who has parents, who comes from a community, whether they're the person who is the victim or someone who finds themselves accused. And so there's a consequence that goes beyond just the person immediately in front of me. It goes on through the community that they're connected to. And here's an example. There was a young man who was in front of me, and I think he was charged with aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. And the offense underlying it was pretty heinous as it was alleged, right? But one thing that his attorney told me that I will always remember and kind of demonstrates this is he said, there is a neighborhood that his absence will impact. He lives among a lot of elderly people on his street. And he's the one who goes over, mows their lawn, brings in their mail. And that might seem really small, but if you're somebody on a fixed income and you can't even afford the dignity of making sure that your lawn is mowed and you have access to your mail, that young man's absence matters. And granted, that's just one of many factors I have to consider, but it just demonstrates that there's more to people than what shows up on a page, and you have to be a critical thinker. Listen, I live in the inner city. I've had to find and sign warrants for houses that are just 5 blocks away from me. So I understand everybody's concern about safety. I pass that house and that street every day as I'm heading home. But I understand also the beauty and the brilliance that lives in my neighborhood. I love my neighbors. They're all hardworking. There's some young people who live on this street who ride their bikes, who told me the other day when my family was here during the storm and so they didn't have lights, rang my doorbell and say, hey, miss, somebody's trunk is open in your front yard, right? Like these are regular people who are also doing really positive things. And so I know the tension that both good and bad can come from a certain place. And so what I bring to the bench is the understanding of nuance. As an immigrant, having gone through the immigration system, even though me and my family were trying to do everything right, it was not easy navigating it. We felt very vulnerable. So I understand what it's like to go into a system seeking justice. And because you're in a vulnerable population and posture, you're not always met with that. You're not always treated like a human being. And so I have never forgotten who I am and whose I am and where I come from. And I bring that to the bench to bring dignity and to ensure that no matter what I do, people feel fully seen, feel fully heard, and they feel respected no matter what the result is.
As a Black Latina, it's interesting because you bring a necessary intersectionality, not only with the Black and Latino population, but even with the white population, which is where, a whole lot of the judges lie. I think it's important for, first of all, what you spoke about there was very empathetic. And I think it's what we need in judges. I'm going to segue to bail in a minute, but I want to take a closer look at this. There are certain cultural issues based on Latinidad, based on Blackness, based on all these issues that sometimes having judges that don't understand these concepts would give sentences that defy cultural issues that should be taken into account. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that with regards to how you make judgments?
Yes, I think what you said is so important in terms of what we statistically see as the communities that bear the impact of these decisions. And prior to taking the bench, I did criminal defense as well as civil litigation. And the vast majority of my clients were people of color, specifically Black and Latino people. And so I had a lens of that already. But when you take the bench and you're not just focused on this particular case, you really get a bird's eye view of how systemic these concerns are very quickly. And so as I was sitting, and I've been sitting as a judge, I just immediately noticed every day that I sat on docket and handled matters, just how many people before me were really young, were Black, were Latino, or other, folks of color. And I understood that if we were not careful, we could potentially lose an entire generation, mostly Black and Latino young people, to the criminal justice system and to our prison system. And that's why it's really careful to be mindful of when you're making decisions, not to use a hammer when an Allen tool would do, right? That's what we're really looking at. And I think the way that you start to get at is, one, making sure that you're not so caught up in getting through your cases that you forget the humanity behind your cases, but also taking the time to listen and allowing the parties to be heard. There were multiple times when I was a defense attorney where there was a point that I wanted to make or some information that I wanted to share with the courts. And ultimately, the judge just did not want to give the time of day to hear so I could make this person fully human to them. So they weren't just a number on the page. And so for me, one of the things I'm known for is taking the time to listen to both sides, to both perspectives, and trying to understand, what does justice look like for them? What is going to help make the parties most whole in the situation, even if that is not what is normative for other communities and other cultures? So listening is at the key of it. And as I mentioned earlier, having gone through a system and felt silence often, I'm just keen on always making sure that people are heard, because that's where the nuance lives. That makes the difference between this person's aggravated robbery and this person's aggravated robbery. Mm-hmm. And it's not just criminal history. And in fact, the codes compel us to do that work and often give us a broad range of punishment and discretion, because I think the legislatures even understand that there's no space for a cookie cutter approach with such different people from different backgrounds, from different neighborhoods and different circumstances.
You know, interestingly, sadly, there are people who push a message of punitive sentences in all regards, forgetting that, I mean, if you're not going to have capital punishment that get rid of everybody that you throw in jail, if jail and prison doesn't become a place of rehabilitation, what happens when they come back into society? And we are bearing the brunt of a whole lot of that. Now, earlier, I wanted to jump into bail, because the bail system has been misrepresented entirely. What I want people to first realize that let's note that the bail system wasn't designed by judges. It was actually designed by the state legislature. And therefore, anything that you may think is wrong about the bail system belongs at the state legislature. But that said, why don't you give us a little synopsis of what is so misleading, of the hyperbole that occurs when you have somebody come out on bail and commit a crime, as if there aren't other crimes being committed by people that just got by.
Yes. So as I have gone out to the community, especially running for judge, the issue of bail comes up quite often. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, from the general community in terms of understanding what a judge can and can't do when someone comes before them. And it's not necessarily folks' fault, right? Oftentimes when things are reported, there's not a lot of educational components around them to understand what is going on and what the law says. So the law says that folks who come to court who are accused of a crime are presumed to have the right to bail. All right. And there are very few exceptions where I, as a judge, am permitted to deny someone bail. And in just about all of those instances, it requires due process, meaning we have to have a hearing. So what has to happen is that the state of Texas, represented through the prosecutors, have to bring to my attention the fact that this person is situated in a way where I am permitted to deny them bail. Typically, these are people who are already on bond and now have picked up a new charge. They typically have to file a motion so that the other side has notice that this allegation is being made, that this person is someone who is situated to be denied bail. And then we have to have a hearing where the state has to present sufficient evidence, typically by a preponderance of the evidence, so it's less than beyond a reasonable doubt, that I can hold this person at zero bail until their trial. If there is a situation where the state never files the motion and says, Judge, we don't want to proceed with what's called, in most instances, an 11B hearing, meaning the Texas Constitution, Article 1, 11B sets out in that section instances where someone who is on bail, now having violated the conditions of bond, in most instances alleged to have committed a new crime, can be held at zero bail. So if that motion is never filed, I can't do it. And if it's filed and then the state decides, Judge, we're not going to proceed with the hearing, instead we want to argue for sufficient bail, then at that point, we're just discussing an amount. I am no longer have the power to hold that person at zero bail. So I think the public perception, as it's been told to me by a number of people, is that, well, this person was charged with this offensive murder, so that means they automatically should not get bail. Well, no, the law still says that they have a presumption of bail unless the Constitution sets out in one of the enumerated ways, and it's about 3 different ways in the Constitution under 11A, 11B, and 11C, where they can be held at zero bail. And unless the state takes action under one of those statutes, and there's a couple others that you can take action under, then I can't hold them at zero bail. We're just talking about how much money we should set bail.
When you say hold them at zero bail, you're talking about they don't get bail at all, right? They
don't get bail at all. Right. Okay. So it has a zero there. And so the person is being detained in custody until their trial. And people also have to remember that when someone comes in front of me, they are constitutionally presumed innocent. And so that is likely why the legislature, in its wisdom, has set up these parameters that if you are going to go against this constitutional protection, right, federally and statewide, that this person is presumed innocent, if we're going to rebut that presumption, then we have to have due process. We need to have a hearing. And here are the instances where we think that's appropriate. I believe there are other states where for certain offenses, people can be held at zero bond, but that's not what we have here, right? So if it doesn't fit within those guidelines, I cannot be above the law and do something that's extrajudicial and violates the same constitutions I'm required to uphold. Ultimately, my fidelity is to the law, even if there's a situation where the result may make me uncomfortable, I have to follow the law.
Now, Miss Judge Barrow, I know you can't get political, but I do need to get political at this point in this discussion. Republicans in our legislature have constantly given information to the media and otherwise to give you the impression that Harris County judges are somehow lenient on criminals or somehow allowing criminals to get on the streets. That is the tenet that they put out there. The responsibility of bail was designed by these same legislatures who also partake within the Constitution that created the policies that these judges must follow. If you have an issue with bail, and this goes with with several of these people out there that I hear talking on the right and a few in the middle, if they have a problem, the legal way, the constitutional way to do it is in Austin. Not the judges, for anybody who took basic political classes. Judges simply interpret the law. They interpret the law. I digress. Please continue, my friend.
No, I certainly can't comment on anything that you said, but I have told people, if you don't agree, for instance, with the range of punishment when I'm picking juries, or don't believe that the system that we have is one that leads you to feel safe, take those feelings and lobby your legislatures. Let the people who represent know how you feel. That is your right. That's not me advocating for any position because I'm not allowed to do that. But I think it's important for people to know in systems that often make people feel disempowered, that there are ways that they can let their voices be heard. But ultimately, as you mentioned, as a judge, my job is to interpret the laws. I don't make laws. I help do my part to enforce them in a way that is fair and equitable and just.
Well, look, Judge Barrow, this has been very educational. Like I said, I'm very impressed with the information that you've given to both myself and the audience. I always ask one last question, and that is, what should I have asked you that I didn't?
Well, I will make a plug during this time for people to do similar to what I just mentioned, which is to engage the systems that impact their lives. As you know, right now we are in the midst of an election process. And of course, I want people to go out and vote. Get registered and vote for me, Stacy Allen Barrow, Barrow, your choice for the 487th Criminal District Court. But I want people to engage the political system because your vote is your voice. And so I want to share some important dates that are coming up. October 7th, which is right around the corner. We're already in August, and I can't even believe it. October 7th is a deadline to register to vote here in the state of Texas and throughout the nation, quite frankly, to have enough time to be able to vote in the general election, which will include everything from the president all the way down to my seat, all the way past me. So below the ballot, below my race, is the race for the district attorney. So as a judge, I can do all the things that I want to do, including looking at our probation system and connecting people with actual resources such as job resources and community-based resources. So even when they're done with probation, they have the type of support that they need. But it's up to the district attorney to agree to a plea agreement that includes probation. It is up to the district attorney to dismiss cases. And so there's a lot of checks and balances within the courts. So if you don't vote all the way down the ballot, to me, you're going to miss the district attorney's race, right? And we all have a role to play in the system. So go register to vote. You can visit www.harrisvotes.com in order to figure out and confirm if you're registered to vote, where to register to vote so your voice can be heard. And then again, as I mentioned, you got to cast your vote and not just go and vote for the presidential race, which gets the most publicity, but you have to vote all the way from the White House through the courthouse. The lower on the ballot, the closer to home, the more impact we have on your everyday lives. I tell people all the time, you're more likely to come in front of me as a judge than you are to even meet your state representative, let alone the president. And so the folks who have the most contact with you have the most impact on you. So it's very important to vote for judicial candidates. And I have to make a plug for my own campaign. Again, a lot of attention goes to presidential campaigns, and people forget that the same energy that they're putting into those campaigns need to be put into local races, including judicial races. And so I would ask people to go to my website, stacyforjustice.com, to learn more about my campaign and to consider donating or even volunteering for my campaign. Every dollar that you give to my campaign can go far because I'm nimble. I'm already on the ground. I'm connected to your community. And so I know how to stretch those dollars to help get your seniors and your young folks and everybody in between out to the polls and engaged in this process, not just this election cycle, but beyond. I'm on social media everywhere, including on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, at Stacy for Justice. So it's consistent across. And so let's keep in touch. Let's keep the conversations going and reach out to me if you're having a community event. I'm happy to come out and meet and greet people. I think it's important for people in public office to meet folks wherever they are. And I've crisscrossed throughout the county from Barrett Station to Kingwood to Humble, bringing my message of connected community perspective of justice to the bench everywhere that I can. So if there's an opportunity to come out to your community, I'm happy to do that.
Judge Stacy Allen Barrow, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right. It's been my honor to have you, especialmente que eres panameña.
Claro que sí, mucho gusto, and thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a true honor.
Thank you. Welcome to another edition of Politics and Right. I'm Egberto Willies. Today we're honored to have Laura Packard with Americans for Contraception. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks for having me.
Well, actually, I'm excited to have you because you have a big blow-up, what again?
A gigantic inflatable IUD is right behind us. You can't see it, but it is 20 feet tall and magnificent.
And you know what? I'm going to go take a quick video of it after we talk, and I'm going to splice that right into this so that people can see exactly what we're talking about. Anyway, Laura, tell me a little bit about, first of all, your organization.
Well, Americans for Contraception was founded after the Supreme Court Dobbs decision, which not only threatened abortion, but we've seen people come after IVF, and we've seen some politicians go after contraception or birth control.
Right. It's kind of it's kind of ridiculous that they've moved. I mean, it's almost like I never like when people talk about the slow creep, because a lot of times it's an excuse to not do something. But in this case, what we're having is a slow creep. First, we stop women from being able to control their own bodies from having abortions. Now we wanted to tell them we want to control your contraception, etc. Don't you think this is something that more women should be out there revolting about, or is it that you don't think they quite understand what's going on?
Well, I think that people don't necessarily know.
Right.
For example, Project 2025, which is
Yes.
Trump's agenda, is going after contraception, and hopefully the media will cover that more so people know what's at stake.
Well, let me give you some good news about that. Project 2025 searches on Google has now exceeded the superstar. What's her name?
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. Yes. Taylor Swift. And I couldn't believe it that Taylor Swift was always number one in the searches, and Project 2025, something political, went over it. Now, how are you intending to engage to further push this message and let women, well, actually, I'm saying let women know. It's not just let women know. It's let everybody know that our women are being placed in danger by our current political crop.
Well, contraception affects everybody. This is not just a women's issue. This is everyone's issue.
Right.
Because everyone should be able to choose when they grow their family.
Right.
And so what we're doing is we are here at Netroots Nation with our inflatable IUD, but we are taking that IUD everywhere. So we are getting the word out. The Senate last month voted against the Right to Contraception Act. Republicans in the Senate blocked that bill. So we need to spread the word about that so people know what their elected officials are doing. And also, right now, the U.S. House is voting on a budget bill that zeroes out family planning funds. $0.
As you mean, that is one of the most ridiculous things, because if you say that you are against abortion, one of the easiest ways to prevent abortion is through contraception, and also educating women who don't, I keep saying educating women, which is completely wrong. Educating people, both men and women, how best to not have kids they don't want.
Right, exactly. And unplanned pregnancy is something that affects men and women.
Right.
And so we're spreading the word. You can follow Americans for Contraception on social media and go to our website to see where the IUD is coming next. But I think it's important, since this is not being covered as much by the media. Thank you for talking about it. But it's important for people to educate themselves, do those Google searches on Project 2025, find out how your representatives have voted, and spread the word. Because unfortunately, the media is not doing that for us. We have to be the media and let people know what's going on.
I love that. We have to be the media. Now, real quickly, as far as Project 2025, what within Project 25, if you know it, I don't know if it specifically targets contraception, IVF, etc.
Well, they're going after emergency contraception, and some people consider IUDs they're trying to confuse people with birth control and abortion.
Right.
Things.
Right.
They're trying to muddy the waters and
Right.
say that some forms of birth control are a form of abortion. So they're going squarely after that. And they're going after the funding for family planning, to let people know about their choices and options.
Right.
So they're trying to keep people ignorant about your choices, and they're trying to make it so that you can't even have access to all the forms of contraception that are already out there.
It's shameful that, when you even, it even sounds funny when you say it. And when I say funny, I don't mean in a laughing form, but that you say, what are your choices? I mean, I sit down there and I'm thinking, it's your body. Why the hell should somebody be able to say, what are the choices I am going to give you to do what you want to do? It makes absolutely no sense, in my opinion. Now, there are even laws out there that they're trying to pass that would give personhood to a fertilized egg. It is one of the moves that I'm glad you all are out there sort of making people aware that these things are happening. And even if you think it's not going to happen to you right now, it's going to happen to your mother, your father, your sister, or somebody else. Your thoughts?
Well, if they, personhood, they're trying to say that a blastocyst, that a fertilized egg is a person and has the same rights as a person. And so that goes squarely after IVF, that goes after contraception.
Exactly.
This is way beyond abortion.
Right.
And they were never going to stop it.
Right.
Because I think there's religious motives
Right.
And control motives, and
I think that second part has so much emphasis. That control more. If we control you, I mean, we control everything. Anyway, give me a closer.
well, this is all about protecting our reproductive freedoms. So we have our modern Lady Liberty here.
Yes.
Frida Womb, the 20-foot IUD.
And we're going to put a second thread in here on that. Yeah.
She's a symbol of all of our choices, our freedoms to make the right choice for our bodies. This should be between you and your doctor and your partner. What is the best form of birth control for you? This should not be something that politicians decide for you, because they are not your doctor.
Laura Packard from Americans for Contraception. Thank you so kindly for speaking to me. And this is something that we got to get out there. And you're doing very important work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto, Willies, your host. Today we are honored to have the one and only Tim Wise.
Thank you.
Tim, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing all right. Good to see you again.
Hey, look, let me tell you, I've interviewed Tim a few times. Tim is what I call a truth teller on race, a truth teller even on economics, even though he's not an economics guy, but he has economic implementation.
Sure.
How are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good. Feeling good about being here, getting to talk to folks, seeing the resistance in action, so that's nice.
And I think it's great. But anyway, look, you are what many would consider a controversial dude.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it depends on who you ask. I think whenever white men in particular spend 30 years of their life or 30 minutes of their life overtly challenging and speaking out against racism and white supremacy and structural and systemic racial injustice, it's not that it necessarily is controversial, but it is something people aren't used to, right? And so they can't quite figure out what to make of it. Why are you saying that? What are you saying? And so for some white folks, they'll view it as almost a form of
heresy.
Yeah, heresy or race treason or whatever. And for folks of color too, there's a certain suspiciousness, which I get, which is, why is this white guy talking about this stuff? What's in it for him? What's his angle? Because we have a history of white allyship and solidarity that hasn't been taught. Most white folks don't know that history, for instance. So we don't even understand that we as white people have a role to play in the undoing of systemic racism, because we haven't learned the stories of those people who were white, who were active in the movement, unless they were martyrs, right? So John Brown, sure. Goodman and Schwerner, sure. Viola Liuzzo, sure, but all those people were murdered for their actions. There are also a lot of white folks who did the work, who didn't die, who continue to do the work. And so I think if you don't know that, if someone like myself or other white folks who do this work come along, people just don't know what to make of it. And so it becomes controversial because it's odd to them, I suppose.
Right. Now, you've been doing this for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And you get some flack sometimes because, who are you to speak on this issue?
Right.
To which I actually say, you need to be speaking on this issue. Why? Because you're a part of this issue. Right. Now, how do you express to these people that are so defensive in the things that you have to say? Because I don't think, how do you handle the comments like, you don't need to talk about that because I didn't do this to them.
Right.
It were the guys of the past that do it. And how do you address that?
Well, first of all, we all learn Newton's first law of motion in elementary school or middle school, inertia, right? What happens, an object in motion tends to remain in motion. And that's not just true of the physical universe. It's true of the socioeconomic and the political. So what happens in one generation affects the next and the next. I'm very aware that none of the people in my audiences, nor I myself, are the ones who created the system of white supremacy. I know how old we are. The system's been around for hundreds of years. But I realize that we've inherited the legacy of that. Just like if you become the CEO of a corporation, you don't get to go in and say, wow, look at all these assets that the last CEO accumulated, and then the CFO brings you the ledger and says, well, but here are the outstanding debts. You don't get to go, oh, but I didn't take out those loans. Those weren't my debts. You have to take care of the debts if you're going to take advantage of the assets. And in this country, I think a lot of folks, particularly in the white community, have decided we're going to use all the assets that have been accumulated over centuries, including centuries of overt racial oppression. Not just today, but the times that virtually everyone acknowledges that, yes. And we're going to use those assets, and we're going to take advantage of all that good stuff that has been afforded to us as a country, but we're not going to pay the debt side of the ledger. That's what equity work is about. It's about realizing you have to be responsible for the world that you find, even when you're not guilty for finding it the way that you find it.
I think that is best. It's best expressed the way you said it, because a lot of people don't get it. A lot of white people right now are in fact living off of the assets of their forefathers, whether they're guilty for it or not.
Right.
And as such, well, let me change it this way. So what are your thoughts then on reparations?
I think reparations are a moral imperative, and we have an obligation to discuss what that's going to look like and how that's going to work. And I don't think anyone has a clear path forward for doing that, either politically or practically. But the moral imperative of repairing the damage done by the system of enslavement and segregation, Jim Crow, I think is really not debatable. There is a price to be paid, and it has to be paid by the country that allowed, and those institutions that allowed that history to exist, because we do inherit that legacy. And so what does that mean? Well, I think reparations should be systemic, my personal vision of it, because the injury was systemic. Mm-hmm. So it's not about cutting checks to individuals. I think white people get this impression when they hear the term reparations, like, oh my God, I'm going to have a line item on my Quicken, or, it's like water bill, electric bill, black people bill. Right. And that's not what anyone's talking about. Right. We're talking about the government that made possible the elevation of white people to the detriment of black people, pay up for that injury. And we've done it. What's interesting is we've done that kind of big project for white folks before. I mean, in a sense, the New Deal programs that were largely off limits to black folks, at least for the first 20 years, the FHA programs that allowed 35 million white folks to get loans, mostly in suburbs where black and brown folks couldn't live. All that was big government. It was government saying we have an obligation to provide opportunity to people who haven't had it. Now, in that case, it was white working class people. Right. And that was a good idea. But if we can do that for white working class people, why can't we say, hey, you know what? There were some folks who were left out of those things, and we have an obligation to make that right. That's just basic moral justice. Now, we can all debate and disagree about how it gets done in practice and what it looks like, but we ought to at least be able to come together on the moral principle that you don't get to avoid reparation just because we've been running out the clock for hundreds of years. Right?
It is amazing because I think when folks look at it that way, it is possible for them to say, I can understand it. The problem is that there aren't many people that these people respect. Many out there that these people, because what I talk about all of the time is, if I go out there to a white audience and I start talking about reparations, the first thing folks see is who I am, my hue, and look at it with suspicion, right?
Of course.
Oh, of course you're going to want to take my money. If a guy like you goes out there, there's one wall that you don't have to immediately break down before people start listening to you.
That's right.
And when you given that you don't have that wall, they can then listen to your analysis.
That's right.
And that is what you just broke down there. An analysis that says, look, this is what has happened and this is why it needs to be systemic. How can we educate more? Because it seems like the folks need to be educated. Once you're educated, you decide if you want to do wrong or right.
Right. Well, part of it is we have to obviously resist the attempt to whitewash history and the attempt to weaponize colorblindness against all measures of equity efforts. I mean, part of the problem is if you don't teach the history, some of that what I just broke down, a very minor thumbnail sketch of our history. If you don't learn that, then of course you're going to think reparations is just a grift that black folks are running to take white people's money. If you don't understand that black folks' money was already taken, like this is not asking for something that wouldn't have been there. This is asking to be put back into a position more like the one you would have been in had the money not been pre-stolen, right? So people say it's redistribution, but there was pre-distribution. You understand? And if you pre-distribute the resources, taking from black and brown folk and hoarding those resources in the white community. When black folks are like, hey, can we get some of that back? That's not some unjust thing. That's actually saying, no, you were unjustly enriched. You shouldn't have had those resources in the first place. And I know people will say like, well, you know, I'm struggling economically. Well, the good thing about reparations is if it's done through the tax code, which it would be, right? The poorest white folks in the country aren't actually going to be paying into it because they aren't paying income taxes.
And also they'll get a benefit.
They'll actually, two things. One, since they are usually not making enough to have to pay income taxes in the first place, they won't actually see anything coming out of their income for it. And secondly, they will benefit because when that money is put into the hands of black folks who are also disproportionately working class, now what are they going to do? They're going to spend that money. Exactly. That's going to stimulate the economy that working class white people also depend on. Right. That's going to seed black and brown, black owned businesses that are going to hire some of those white folks. Exactly. That's going to improve the schools that not only black kids go to, but white kids go to. That is going to improve the healthcare delivery systems that we all depend on. So the white folks who are going to say, well, I haven't really benefited. Look, I'm poor and I grew up, you know, whenever we talk about white privilege, we all know white folks, all of a sudden, we all believe that we are, you know, coal miners' daughters and we're all born in the hills and hollers of Eastern Kentucky. Well, some of us were born in those spaces, but if we have been left poor by the class system, we ought to be joining with black folks to try to get reparations because those reparations are going to uplift the working class as a whole. They're not going to come out of our taxes. They're going to come disproportionately out of the taxes of more affluent people, the ones who have benefited the most, because that's who pays, as they never fail to remind us, a disproportionate amount of the overall income taxes. So fine, it's not going to be poor white folks. It's not going to be working class white folks. It's going to be the folks who are doing just fine and who have benefited the most from the structure the way it exists right now.
Tell us about Bacon Rebellion in your words.
Well, you know, the reason Bacon's Rebellion is important, right, is that it really is the pivotal moment in colonial history when the elite of that era, Governor Berkeley in Virginia, realized that there was a problem brewing. And the problem was that, you know, poor folks, indentured servants, and enslaved Africans could look around and they could see, like, we're all being screwed. We're all being screwed by the rich. None of us own land. They don't have love for any of us. And so you had these poor peasant class, what we would now call white and black folks, but they weren't called that yet, joining forces to overthrow that arrangement, that aristocracy. And in the wake of that, the elite said, no. And that's when they begin to talk about the white race. That's when they begin to talk about whiteness as almost like a form of property, to quote Cheryl Harris. That's when whiteness becomes a thing that is used to take all of these poor Europeans who had no love for the rich back in England. I mean, they were peasants. They had no love for one another. All these disparate Europeans had spent most of their history killing each other because that was the history of Europe. The history of Europe was killing each other and looking for the witch. That was pretty much what we did in Europe. Oh, yeah. And we get here in the colonies and it's like, oh, but now we got to get all these poor people on our team, because if we don't, they're going to join with those other poor people and take our stuff. And so that trick of whiteness begins in 1676, or right after Bacon's Rebellion, and it is continuing to plague us to this day. It's why poor white Southerners were willing to go and die in the Civil War to maintain the property interest of rich white Southerners. The rich said why they were seceding. They said it was to maintain white supremacy and enslavement. So if you're a poor white person and you don't own slaves, as you would never stop telling us, right? My family didn't even own slaves. Well, then why the hell were they fighting for the ones that did? Why? Well, but our way of life. What do you mean our way of life? Their way of life was owning other human beings and undermining the wage base for working class white people. Because if you're white and you got to charge $1 a day to work on the farm and they can get a black guy to do it for free because they own him, your white ass is not going to get the job, right? Exactly right? So you should have been joining to overthrow the system. But whiteness said, oh no, you're on our team. You've got our uniform. You're wearing our gear. And you may not get in the game. We don't really like you. You're at the end of the bench. You know, you're a sub at best, right? But at least you can call yourself white. You can feel better than somebody. And unfortunately, that continues to plague a lot of people today.
I think that message is so important. That the division that they've created, and I think the reason why you see a lot of rich now supporting a Donald Trump is because they realize, hey, Bacon's Rebellion created this policy, these things that worked. Yeah. Maybe we have to reinstitute it. That's why we got to get rid of DEI. That's why we got to get rid of affirmative action. That's why we need to get rid of all these things, because now we can create that separation again that allows us to maintain what
our economic system depends on to maintain that separation.
Well, two good examples of that. I mean, the debate about immigration. Notice what the right says. They don't just say immigrants are coming taking white people's jobs, right? Donald Trump just said they're taking black jobs. Now, we can get into a whole conversation about what he thinks of when he thinks of black jobs. But isn't it interesting that pivot is about trying to turn black folks against brown folks, right? And then the affirmative action case out of Harvard, who were the plaintiffs? Asian students. It wasn't the angry white girl like Abigail Fisher
from
at Texas, who was, Becky with the bad grades or whatever, her nickname was. They didn't pick another white plaintiff because they realized if you use white people complaining about victimization, at some point people go, really? But you take some Asian folks, you say, oh, we're not racist, see? But what they're doing is they're turning Asian folks against black folks, ignoring the fact that Asian Americans, for example, who have a college degree are still about 15% more likely to be out of work than white folks with a degree, even when they majored in the same subject. So it isn't just black folks that are being underemployed relative to their qualifications. It's not just Latino folks that are being underemployed. It is also Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. But if I tell you the reason you're hurting is that black person took your gig at MIT or they took your slot at Harvard, then you're not going to pay attention to the fact that your income is also less than it ought to be. Your occupational status is less than it ought to be. We always talk about Asian folks all doing so well in America. But if you actually look at the places where Asian Americans are most populated, they have poverty rates that are 2 to 2.5 times the white rates. The only reason that the Asian American overall economic picture looks better is because Asian Americans, 60% live in some of the wealthiest parts of the country that have higher income. But when you disaggregate that, Asian Americans are actually struggling, facing discrimination, facing hate in the wake of COVID, facing all kinds of racism. But if you tell them, oh, your problem is black people, your problem is DEI, then you don't have to deal with any of that. Right.
Well, look, my brother Tim Wise.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so
Thank you.
kindly.
Thank
Because,
you.
and let me tell you, we need your work. And we need guys like you doing this work. So I hope in the process you're multiplying.
Well, I hope so. I hope so.
It's the only salvation we have to the damn country.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate
thank you
that.
For the work you do, brother.
Hey, you too, my man.
Peace.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Many of you know her credentials, but what I love about Kamala Harris goes beyond her resume is that she sees the humanity in everyone. She's the only candidate in this race who is capable of empathy. When I first got to Congress, I wasn't sure I made the right decision. The caucus couldn't elect a speaker, and the oversight committee was unhinged. I was going through all of this when I visited the vice president's residence for the first time. As I approached Vice President Harris for our official photo, she turned to me and asked, "What's wrong?" Mind you, we'd never met, but she saw right through me. She saw the distress. I immediately began crying, and the most powerful woman in the world wiped my tears and listened. It's so hard for me to tell this story. She then said, among other things, "You are exactly where God wants you. Your district chose you because they believe in you, and so do I." The next month, I went viral for the first of many times to come for hitting Republicans with a dose of their own medicine. That brief but impactful interaction gave me my legislative legs, and I've been running ever since. The question before us is, will a vindictive, vile villain violate voters' vision for a better America or not? I hear alliterations are back in style. We deserve better. We deserve a president who can be a bright light in a sea of darkness. One who will pull us forward, because we won't go back. Amanda Gorman said it best. There's always light if only we are brave enough to see it. If only we are brave enough to be it. Kamala Harris showed me that light. And America, when she is our president, together we will shine as that beacon of hope and freedom around the world once more. God bless y'all.
Old school journalism is dead. I mean, it is great to see some of our younger journalists do what they do best, what I call explicative journalism. I want you to listen to Alexei McCammon, who calls out Donald Trump, who claim right now that he's now going to protect IVF and support the government giving money or insurance being forced to give women the IVF treatments if they need it. I mean, it's sad, but again, the he said, she said type journalism would fail in trying to show the flip-flop that Donald Trump is all about. but I want you to listen to somebody who isn't fooled and somebody who knows how to be a journalist and at the same time be explicative with it. Alexei McCammon, listen to her.
This is something that I guess, Alexei, the former president is going to have a tough time convincing people what his position is dogmatically, one way or another.
It's crazy. Kudos to Dasha for getting him on the record saying something that is as crazy as the most extreme positions he has taken on women's and reproductive rights. I mean, talk about a political flip-flop. He thinks that it's politically expedient to suddenly support women and our ability to have reproductive rights. He thinks it's suddenly politically expedient to say that he will protect women if he's reelected, that he will pay for IVF treatments when his running mate is dumping on women who don't have their own biological children, when Republicans in the mold of his party have become so extreme that they are coming after birth control, mifepristone, IVF, splitting hairs on different procedures that women and families need to take in desperate times to save lives to be able to even have a family. It's a complete joke. He's a complete joke when he talks about women's rights and reproductive rights. And we should absolutely not believe him when he says that he will pay or have the government pay for IVF treatments, because as we know well, not only is his running mate an extreme conservative on these issues, Donald Trump himself has gotten the party to be where it is at on these positions. And we should never take him at his word, because he listens to the last and most influential person that he speaks to on major policy issues.
That's what I'm talking about. She used that short segment that she had on the program to make a complete circle around what Donald Trump is really all about. She claimed it. She goes ahead and explained it. And after she did it, she gave the outcome. Perfect. Support for this show, Politics Done Right, comes from politicsdoneright.com, publishers of How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It. As I See It, Class Warfare, The Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom. It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors, and other books written by Egberto, Willies. Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.